And remember, we thought opening up all of these seals was going to be good, and each one just brought more and more and more calamity. Can you remember that? So it was the 7 seals, was week 2. Anybody remember week 3? You see, somebody has their books and they're just reading every heading. 6 of the 7 trumpets. I'm so impressed that you keep your books in such good order. I couldn't even find them myself. So 6 of the 7 trumpets. We looked after the seals had been opened. Suddenly there were all these trumpets that were blowing. And we looked at 6 of the 7 trumpets. Remember the 6 of the 7 trumpets? Can you remember anything about them? They also brought calamity. I mean, it always seems to do this. It repeated a lot of what we saw about the 7 seals. And then week 4, the 7th trumpet. Well done. Can anyone remember anything about the 7th trumpet? It's in chapter 9 of Revelation. Well done. It was the angel and the little scroll. Can you remember the angel that stood with his foot in the ocean and his foot on land? And he read the little scroll. And then there were the 2 witnesses that were speaking. And I can hardly remember what we spoke about. But that was the last 4 weeks. So now we've got it that the 7 seals have been opened, the 7 trumpets have been blown. Can you remember that between each of these moments something happens? So between the 7 letters and the 7 seals, there was this vision of the throne room. Between the 7 trumpets, the 7 seals and the 7 trumpets, there was those earthquakes. Now between the 7 trumpets and whatever's going to happen next, we have this moment. This chapter that we're going to read today, these 2 chapters, are probably the most well-known of the book of Revelation. They're probably the chapters that everybody speaks about the most. They're also most likely the most misunderstood, and they're most likely the most frightening chapters of Revelation. And so we're going to start by reading Revelation chapter 12 from verse 1. We're only going to read, the whole of chapter 12, and then we'll discuss it in sections. So Revelation chapter 12 from verse 1. A great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, the enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his heads. His tail swept 1/3 of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that he might devour her child the moment it was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule over the nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the desert to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth and his angels with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, "Now have come the salvation and power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ. For the accuser of our brothers, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short." When the dragon saw that he had been hurled down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the desert, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time, out of the serpent's reach. Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river to overtake the woman and sweep her away with the torrent. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river, and the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And the dragon stood on the shore of the sea. Thanks be to God for his word. We're going to break this into 2 parts. We're first going to look at the part of the woman and the dragon and who they are. And then we're going to look at the part of the war that happens in heaven and spews out onto earth. And so in order to do that, I'm going to ask us to read 6 verses again. Because when you first hear the story, it doesn't sink in, does it? It just kind of goes like, what? Like, say, no. So we're going to read just from verse 1 through to verse 6. A great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven. So here's what it talks about, a great and wondrous sign. A woman, listen to the description, was clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his heads. His tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that he might devour her child the moment it was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the desert to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. Thanks be to God for his word. Pray for me for tonight. If I had to say to you that some people can be recognized by certain phrases, would you agree? So, for example, if I had to say, I'm not going to do the accent very well, but if I had to say, I'll be back, who is that? Arnold Schwarzenegger, isn't it? That's true, right? I have to admit that I knew that you guys were here when I heard Uncle Norman laugh. You can hear who he is by his laugh. There are phrases, there are ways of knowing people by phrases that they say. I wonder if in 1,000 years, if somebody had to stand, maybe not here, but if somebody had to be in front of a crowd of people and say, who am I speaking about when I say I'll be back, do you think they would know? Probably not. They probably wouldn't know in 1,000 years that whenever somebody says, I'll be back, you think of Arnold Schwarzenegger. They wouldn't realize that because too much time has passed. In Scripture, the people in the time of John, now remember, this is John writing to John's people who are under persecution. This isn't John writing to Louise 2,000 years later. This is John writing to John's people in times of persecution. The amazing thing about the Word of God is that it's still relevant to us today, 2,000 years later. But what happens is, in Scripture, certain phrases will remind people of certain characters. Does that make sense? So when we read a passage like this that doesn't make sense at first glance, we mustn't read it literally. We mustn't imagine that there's going to come a time where we see a woman in the sky who's pregnant and about to give birth, and there will be a dragon with 10 heads and 7 horns chasing her. It's not meant to be read literally that that's what we see. It's figurative language used for the people of that time. So there are clues to give us a way of knowing who John is speaking about in this passage. The first one is he quotes a psalm. He quotes Psalm 2 when he says, he will rule with an iron scepter. Now, Psalm 2 was a messianic psalm. What does that mean? It was a psalm about the Messiah. So one of the phrases about the Messiah was that he will rule with an iron scepter. So when anyone wrote anything about he will rule with an iron scepter, everyone who was reading it would know who were they speaking about? Who were they speaking about? The Messiah, Jesus. So in other words, this passage, this boy, this male child that's going to be born to this pregnant woman is Jesus Christ. So it's telling the story of what was happening in the heavens during the time of Jesus. Does that make sense? Everyone with me? Everyone awake? Oh, that's always a good sign. Think about the story now. It says that as the child was born, the dragon tried to devour him. What do we know about the birth of Jesus? Herod was trying to kill him. So this story of the dragon and the woman and this child and the dragon trying to devour the child is telling the story in a very vivid way of Jesus and what's to come. Make sense? The question is, who's the woman? Now, this is where it gets a bit trickier. Okay. I'd like to say, oh, that's simple. It must be Mary. Isn't that true? That makes sense, right? That makes sense. But it's not that simple. Because Mary's story and the story of this woman don't really align very well when we know the stories. So what else could it be? There's another clue. I want to see if anyone can get this. I hope you didn't read the notes beforehand, because then you're going to seem, I didn't know this until I read about it. So, somebody in the Old Testament tells a story about the sun, the moon, and 12 stars. Does anyone know who that was? Joseph. Joseph. Can you remember? Joseph and his technicolored, it is Joseph, hey, yes. Joseph and his technicolored coat, favorite of his father. He is telling his brothers about a dream that he has. In this dream that he has, he sees the sun and the moon and the 12 stars bowing, or the 11th star, he's the 12th, bowing down to him. And he tells his brothers this, and they get very, very jealous, and it adds to the whole story of where they sell him into slavery. He tells his father about the dream, and his father turns around and says, are you trying to imply that your mother and I and your 11 brothers will bow down and worship you? This woman is described as having the sun and the moon and 12 stars. That's not by accident. It means that John is describing the true Israel, because that was the beginning of the Israelite nation, the people of God. Okay, that was a bit abstract. Does that make sense? Make sense? So when I speak about a rainbow nation, what are we speaking about? South Africa, we know it as a rainbow nation. It does not mean that we have people that are pink and purple and yellow and orange and green. I can't think of all the colors of a rainbow right now, but it is a description that describes our nation. So when people spoke about the sun and the moon and the 12 stars, it was the people of Israel. It was the people of God, the true nation of God. And where does Jesus come from? The people of God, the nation. So this woman is not Mary. This woman symbolizes the faithful people of God. It is out of and from the faithful people of God that the Messiah came. Mary was faithful. Joseph was faithful. Zechariah, Elizabeth, they were faithful. Whole bunch of people were faithful. Out of that group of faithful people of God, the Messiah is born. So who's the dragon after? Firstly, the Messiah. And when he cannot get to the Messiah, who does he turn against? The people of God. So the woman is the people of God. The dragon chases after the true people of God, trying to destroy the true people of God. What happens after Jesus defeats death? Persecution breaks out against the people of God. Where do they flee to? The deserts, the outside places. Does that make sense? Any thoughts, questions, comments so far? See, it's not about a real dragon that's going to be up in the sky. It was the story of Jesus. The next question is, who is the dragon then? Okay, let's unpack the dragon a little bit. He's red. He has 7 heads and 10 horns. Now, red was a sign of violence, chaos, sacrifice. So it shows that this dragon is violent, he's chaotic, he demands sacrifice. Secondly, the horns represent power, heads represent rulers, crowns represent authority. Therefore, this dragon has 7 royal diadems, and it signifies that he has complete power over the kingdoms of the world that are opposed to the kingdom of God. This dragon is the ultimate enemy of God, the one who tries to defeat what God was doing through the work of Jesus. This dragon is symbolic of the devil, of Satan, of the ultimate evil. Does that make sense? Okay. 3 things about the community of God. I'm on page 8 if you want to look at that with me. H.B. Sweet. Oh, can you remember 1,260 days? Can anyone remember that? That was in the previous week. It was the time of trial. So they once again in this time of trial. Okay? H.B. Sweet again sees something symbolic here. The church had to flee into the wilderness, and the wilderness is lonely. For the early Christians, life was lonely. They were isolated in a pagan world. There were times when Christian witness is bound to be a lonely thing. But even in human loneliness, there is divine companionship. 3 things about the community of God that we notice in this story. It was out of the community of God that Christ came. And out of it, Christ has still to come for those who've never known him. Second thing, there are forces of evil, spiritual and human, which are set on the destruction of the community of God. The enemy does not want the community of God to do well. Thirdly, however strong the opposition against the community of God is, however sore its sufferings, the community of God is under the protection of God, and therefore it never can be ultimately destroyed. No matter what this dragon does, it cannot destroy the people of God. Even when it spews out a river, it cannot destroy the people of God. I also love how creation helps the people of God. You see that story? Where it swallows up the river. Now think about Romans chapter 8, one of my favorite passages, where it says all of creation is waiting for the sons and daughters of God to be revealed. True people of God will long to work with creation instead of destroying it. because creation is God's creation. Okay, do you feel a bit better about the dragon and the woman and the child? Does it make a little bit more sense? You can breathe. There's no 7-headed dragon. But perhaps the unseen enemy is worse. Carrying on, we are now going to read from verse 7. Can you remember, before we read this, can you remember the letters in Revelation? There was stuff happening on earth, and there was also stuff happening in heaven. They were interrelated. Can you remember that? Can you remember the same was true with the 7 seals? The same was true with the trumpets. There's this, throughout Revelation, there's this is what's happening on earth, and this is what's happening in heaven. They're always connected. Always connected. There's a picture of the woman and this 7-headed dragon, by the way. And so, bearing that in mind, let's read from verse 7. And there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, the ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ. For the accuser of our brothers, who accuses them before God day and night, has been hurled down. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short. When the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. This is the church, the people of God. The woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the desert, where she would be taken care of for a time, a times, and half a time, out of the serpent's reach. Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river to overtake the woman and sweep her away with a torrent. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandment and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And the dragon stood on the shore of the sea. So we have this war in heaven. Michael and his angels, Satan and his angels, they're having this war in heaven all at the same time as the Messiah and all of this. This is the ultimate war. Jesus obviously wins the war by conquering death and defeating death and rising again. But then this passage tells something very interesting. It tells about how this has now finally been won. Satan has finally been overthrown. He's now thrown onto the earth. This has been a very, very long war. But what I love about this passage is, do you hear what he says about the people of God? He says, they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. John shows that what the people of God were doing on earth impacted what was happening in heaven, and vice versa. That the people were not afraid to die for their faith. They were not afraid to be martyrs. They were not afraid to live the alternative life. They were not afraid to live for Jesus and die for Jesus. And so when the praise is given for the victory in heaven, they're part of that victory. Isn't that incredible? It goes on to then say that this dragon then goes and pursues the woman, can't get hold of her, and then pursues her offspring. And that is all the generations of the people of God to come. right up until the end of time. Any thoughts, comments, questions so far? Is the name... Yeah, so the name dragon, Satan, and devil, it's all the same in the story. Okay, do you want to ask that over the microphone, please?
So they called him the accuser of the brethren before God, and then he was flung down to earth. In the early days, he had access, because then we think of the story of Job, where he stood in front of God. In other words, he's not in front of God anymore.
So, yeah, the thought behind Job was that Satan is the ultimate accuser. So God is gracious and kind, and Jesus is the one who forgives. Satan is the opposite of that. So if Jesus is the one who forgives and brings to God, then Satan is the one who tries to accuse and keep people away from God. And Job touches on that he was trying to accuse Job and say, oh, but he only loves you because you're so good to him. And so it was an ancient thought from the beginning of Scripture, not the beginning, but from very early, like the time of Job, that Satan was the accuser. And even now, sometimes we think that we've fallen so short that we can't come before God. Sometimes we think we don't deserve to come before God. Those feelings and thoughts comes from the accuser, not the forgiver. Just bear that in mind. Anyone else? Any thoughts or questions before we carry on?
Just for curiosity, you see this, it sounds like one day, but it's centuries. So this all happened then before the Garden of Eden, where Eve was tempted by Satan. Am I right or wrong, or is it a continuation before that? Did anything happened before that? The Garden of Eden was created? I don't know, I'm just asking.
So there's that joke that says that this man goes to God and says, Lord, you know what, for you 1,000 years is like one day. And then he says, and for you, Lord, 1,000 rand is like one, or 1,000,000 rand is like 1 cent. And God goes, yes. He says to him, so God, can you give me 1 cent? And God says, sure, just wait one day. The reason I tell that joke is because what we need to remember is that we are stuck in a very linear time frame on earth. So we don't understand, we can't live outside of our time. So when we read passages like this, we want it to make chronological sense. Is it a day? Is it 100 days? Is it however long? But when it's talking about things that happen in heaven, heaven is a timeless space. So this could be something that happened from before Eden and continued till the end of time, but it's described as one story. It's what's happening in the heavenly realm. It's not confined to our time. So I don't know if that makes sense. Probably makes it more confusing. But so it's so difficult for us to think of heaven without thinking of time. But God is timeless. And so God's realm is timeless. There is no time there. So it happens, but it continually happens, but it doesn't happen at a certain point. I don't know if that makes any sense or if I'm making it more confusing. Am I making it more confusing?
It's clear as mud.
Clear as mud. Some things we cannot comprehend. God is too good.
Can I ask another one? When John wrote chapter 12, was it now what God showed him, or was it a vision that John saw and then transcribed it into writing?
So all of Revelation is visions that John sees revealed to him by God that he then translates into writing. So there are all these visions that John sees. Don't know if that makes sense. Okay. Are we ready to move on? We are getting into the worst part. Revelation chapter 13. We are going to read from verse 1 through to verse 10. From verse 1 through to verse 10. This is the passage where if anyone speaks about Revelation, they start thinking of this chapter. So now the dragon is standing on the shore of the sea. And I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads, and 10 crowns on his horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and his great authority. So where does the beast get his authority and his power? From the dragon. Okay, remember that. It seems like he's called out of the sea. Who calls him out of the sea? It's the dragon. Okay, so the beast is an agent of the dragon. Okay, just remember that as we keep reading. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had healed. The whole world was astonished and followed the beast. Men worshipped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshipped the beast and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can make war against him?" The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise his authority for 42 months. He opened his mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. He was given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them, and he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the book of life, belonging to the Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world. He who has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to go into captivity he will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword he will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the parts of the saints. Whew. Hectic, isn't it? Okay, we're going to unpack it slowly. We're going to unpack this a little bit slowly. The dragon stands on the shore and seems to call out the beast of the sea. When something comes from the sea, what does it mean? It is foreign. It's not from the land. It's not homegrown, is it? We say it's from overseas. Okay? So here's a foreign entity that has been called out that has great power and authority. It has 10 heads, 7 horns. Am I right? 10 heads, 7 horns. No, other way around. 10 horns, 7 heads, and a crown on each horn. Each head has a blasphemous name. It looks like a leopard, has feet like a bear, and a mouth like a lion. It has power and authority that was given to it by the dragon. There's one head, we're going to touch on that later, that had a fatal wound, and that wound was healed. We're also told that people worship the beast. Now here's a clue. People worship the beast. It blasphemes, persecutes the people of God, and everyone has to bow down and worship it. And if they don't, they will be killed, put in captivity, and killed by the sword. Revelation copies Daniel a lot. Okay. Revelation copies Daniel a lot. Daniel speaks about beasts in Daniel 7. He speaks about a lion with eagle's wings. He speaks about a bear. He speaks about a leopard. He speaks about a beast with iron teeth. This beast of John seems to be a combination of all of those. When we unpack the book of Daniel, we realize that Daniel was speaking about nations who had power and authority. Based on what their power and authority were, he would give them these descriptions. So the lion with eagle's wings represented Babylon, the bear represented Media, and the leopard represented Persia, and the fourth one with the iron teeth represented the empire of Alexander the Great. Here we have John, who says that there's this new power that has come from a foreign place, come from overseas. It has the authority given to it by the dragon. In other words, its authority is from evil itself, and it rises up, and it is stronger than all of these previous empires. It's like if you had to take the worst of all of those empires and put them into one. That's who it is. Any idea of who John is speaking about? The Roman Empire. The Roman Empire comes into the land, comes from overseas. It has all the authority and power. Every emperor, by the way, there were 7 Roman emperors, but since the time of Augustus, that was Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero, Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. 7 emperors that came after Augustus, 7 horns. There were 3 other emperors who came in between in a time where Rome was not very stable, but they weren't recognized as the big ones because they didn't reign for long enough. It was too unstable, and so that makes up 10. 10 heads, 7 horns, a crown on each one. Everyone has a blasphemous name written on top. Now, what do we know about the emperors? Is they were saying, I am the Son of God. I am God himself. You need to worship me. All the people had to bow down and worship them. If they weren't bowing down and worshiping them, they were put into captivity or they were put to death. So when John is writing this, the beast out of the sea represents the whole Roman Empire. And John says this Roman Empire has been given the authority to try and destroy the people of God. And what does it do? Just that. It tries everything in its power to destroy the people of God. Does that make sense? Suddenly, this beast is not necessarily a beast that we will one day see come out of the ocean with 7 heads and 10 horns and trying to kill everything. This is John writing to John's people who are living through that time, saying the Roman Empire is evil itself. The Roman Empire is evil itself. Now remember, John can't say that, because if he had to say it, they would just behead him. They would just have him killed. So he has to imply it in all these ways. Now, what do you think, or anybody have any idea of what it meant when he says there was a little head that had been wounded and everyone thought it was dead and then it was alive? Any ideas? Who's one of the most famous Roman emperors? Nero. Nero. I'm going to read this to you. Just turn with me to page 15. It's quite a long story. The first thing that I want to say is that Nero, after Nero became the Roman Empire itself descended into absolute chaos. And it looked as if it was going to be the end of the empire. It looked like it was going to be defeated. So it looked like it was dead. But then it actually rose into a greater power, and so it came back to life again. So that's the first thing, is that people think that that the Roman Empire itself was fatally wounded, but it recovered after that. Secondly, the reason that scholars believe that this head represented Nero is because there were rumors, and there was a whole following of people that believed that Nero had died and came back to life. there was a whole group of people that thought that about Nero himself. And then thirdly, it seems like Nero himself reigned in one way at the beginning of his reign and then changed and became one of the most evil emperors that Rome had ever seen. I want to read this story that William Barclay writes about the life of Nero. You can read with me from page 15. It's quite long, and after the story, we'll take a break for tea and coffee. Here it is. No man ever started life with a worse heritage than Nero. His father was, I can't even say it, Cnesius Domitius Aphanobarus, who was notorious for his wickedness. He killed a free man for no other crime than refusing to drink more wine. Imagine that. He didn't want another drink, so he had him killed. He deliberately ran over a child in his chariot on the Appian Way. And in a brawl in the Forum, he had gouged out the eye of a Roman knight. And he finally died of dropsy, brought on by his debauchery. His mother was Agrippina, one of the most terrible women in history. When this husband knew that he and Agrippina were to have a child, he cynically said that nothing but a monstrous abomination could come from himself and her. When Nero was 3, Agrippina was banished by the emperor Caligula. Nero was handed over to the care of his aunt Lepida, who entrusted his education to 2 wretched slaves, one a barber and the other a dancer. Under the emperor Claudius, Agrippina was recalled from exile. She had now only one ambition. Somehow she wanted to make her son the emperor. She was warned by fortune tellers that if Nero became emperor, the result for her would be disastrous. Her answer was, "Let him kill me, as long as he reigns." Agrippina set to work with all the passion and the intrigue of her stormy nature. Claudius already had 2 children, Octavia and Britannicus, but Agrippina badgered him into adopting Nero as his son. When Nero was 11 years old, she persuaded him to marry her, although he was her uncle. Okay? That's disturbing. Agrippina then summoned the famous philosopher Seneca and the great soldier Afranius Burrus to be Nero's tutors. Steadily, Britannicus, the heir to the throne, was pushed into the background, and Nero was given the limelight. For 5 years, the marriage lasted, and then Agrippina arranged for Claudius's poisoning by a dish of poisoned mushrooms. When Claudius lay in a coma, she hasted his end by brushing his throat with a poisoned feather. No sooner had Claudius died than Nero was led forth as emperor, the army having been bribed to support him. A curious situation ensued. For the next 5 years, Rome was never better governed. So this kid actually became a very, very good governor. Nero was busy playing at painting, sculpture, music, theatricals. He was the complete dilettante, and the wise Seneca and the upright Burrus governed the empire. So the reason he was a good emperor is because he didn't get involved. Then, Nero stopped being the cultured dilettante and embarked on a career of vicious crime. At night, with other gilded youths, he would roam the streets, attacking all whom he could find. Worse was to come. He murdered Britannicus as a possible rival. No young man or woman was safe from his lust. He was a blatant homosexual. He publicly married a youth named Sporus in a state wedding, and he took Sporus with him on a bridal tour of Greece. He was married to a free man called Dorothus. He took Perippia Sabina, the wife of Otho, his closest friend, as his paramour, and kicked her to death when she was with child. He had a passion for wild extravagance and extracted money from all and sundry. The imperial court was a welter of murder, immorality, and crime. One of Nero's passions was building, and in AD 64 came the great fire of Rome, which burnt for a week. There is not the slightest doubt that Nero himself began it, or that he hindered every attempt to extinguish it, so that he might have the glory of rebuilding the city. The people knew well he was responsible for the fire, but Nero diverted the blame onto the Christians, and most deliberately sadistic of all his persecutions broke out. Here's what he did. He had the Christians sewn up in the skins of wild animals and set his savage hunting dogs upon them. He had them enclosed in sacks with stones and flung into the Tabor. He had them coated with pitch and set alight as living torches to light the gardens of his palace. The insanity of evil grew wilder and wilder. Seneca was forced to commit suicide. Burrus was murdered by a poisoned draught, which Nero sent him as a cure for a sore throat. Anyone who incurred Nero's slightest displeasure was killed. Agrippina made some attempt to control him, and finally he turned against her. He made repeated attempts to murder her by poison, by causing the roof of a house to collapse, by sending her to sea in a boat designed to break up, and finally he sent his freedman Anacetus to stab her to death. When Agrippina saw the dagger, she bared her body. "Strike my womb," she said, because it bore a Nero. It could not last. First Julius Vindex rebelled in Gaul, the Galba in Spain. Finally the Senate took its courage in its hand and declared Nero a public enemy. In the end, he died by suicide in the wretched villa of a free man called Pharon. This is the head of the beast, wounded and restored. The Antichrist, whom John was expected, was the resurrected Nero. That is one evil man who did some evil things. And so he was considered to be the little head that had been wounded and came back to life. He ruled in one way and then ruled in a worse way. And he was the absolute epitome of the evil of the Roman Empire. We are going to take a break. Anyone else? Everyone's speechless. I'm a bit afraid.
What I'm just thinking now is what you said earlier about time and time, the heavenly time in the heavenly realm. Now, if we look at all this and we look what happened right from the beginning, what we know and what is happening now, it's all the same. It's almost as if it's repeating over and over. It's almost as if it's happening, everything is happening together. So it's almost as if nothing has changed. So at the end, well, there won't be an end of God's time, but I think that at some point it will come together in a big picture. And that would be when he's totally destroyed.
Thank you. I like that. History repeats itself. Isn't that true, though? Like, history does repeat itself. That's what happens throughout history. If you look at it, there's always a repetition. And it's almost like this cycle will continue throughout this world until right at the end when God has finally defeated everything. Remember, we're not at the end of Revelation. Like, this feels like it's the end of Revelation, but it's only chapter 13. Revelation carries on until chapter 21. We still got a lot to get through. This is not the end. So,
I agree with what this gentleman was saying, and it does repeat itself, but it gets worse. Through the ages, you see it starts off with a small percentage and it's getting worse. But I wanted to throw something in the mix when you were talking. I agree that the first beast is Rome, and it can be a government throughout the ages, not necessarily just Rome. But couldn't the second one, Paul, be warning the people against false religion? The people, because that's what was happening, agnostics that were entering the church at that time, and causing people to actually worship the beast instead of Jesus. And the mark of the beast, the 666, is actually the number for God is 3, and the number for man is 6. So it's 666, man trying to be God. It's just a different way of looking at it. But if you look at it that way, you see it through all the ages as well. The false religions trying to turn man from God.
I love that. Thank you. And I do agree with you. Because also the local governments, the way they were trying to rule was through religion. They were ruling people through religion. Since then, religion and the government have tried to separate. Not really. It's still very intertwined. But you are right. It's the false religions. And thank you, Marsha, for mentioning that. It is in the notes that God's number was 777. The perfect number for God is 777. The imperfect is 666, which also represents, thank you for that. It's the other representation of that. So it's when man tries to be God, and that's exactly what Nero was doing, what all the Roman emperors were doing. So I like that explanation. Thank you.
Louise, we've had quite a chat here on the online group. I'm just trying to go back to where it was. Is today's beast wokeism, wokeism, not work, so it's WOKEISM, wokeism.
That everything's woke. Oh,
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know what
And
that
then
means.
there's been comments, wokeism is awareness of life. It is a false awareness, not God's. Created by people of God, though, only a few people misusing awareness. And then Nelly went into, I think, the dictionary, Collins English Dictionary. Wokeism is British English or wokery, noun, informal, often derogatory, the behavior and attitude of people who are sensitive to social and political injustice. So maybe that's the beast of today. And then Wally asks the question, are we in a post-church or post-Christ time? Do you want to chat to that? And then Cameron set us up that we can, no. Oh, it's not going to feedback. Okay. We had some people that wanted to speak, but Cameron said it's going to feedback, so we're not going to do that. Okay.
Okay. Phew. The wokeism, I'll have to do a lot more research on the wokeism before I can comment on it properly. What I must say is that if you follow religion through the ages, sometimes religion has been very, very destructive by saying some people are in and some people are out, and it became a very judgmental way of living. That religion, Christianity in particular, was all about these people are worthy of God's love and these people are not worthy of God's love. And that was, I think, something that plagued the church for a very long time. Some churches are still like that. Some churches, even in our country, won't give young girls communion if they're pregnant and unmarried. Some churches, they'll give the guys, by the way. That's besides the point. But so Christianity had a history of becoming very judgmental and exclusive and trying to decide who's in and who's out. And I don't think that's the way of Jesus. I think that's a very Pharisaic way, because the Pharisees were all about saying, hey, I'm good enough and you're not, so sorry for you. I think Christianity has taken a movement, and some people might associate some of that with wokeism, of trying to be more accepting and more loving and more gracious to absolutely everybody. And so suddenly I won't mind what your sexuality is, what your sexual orientation is. I won't mind what your gender is, won't mind, so it's this open way of living. I think there can be the extreme where we just say, everything goes, but some behavior is not loving. So we can choose the path of love instead of the path of judgment, and I think that's where we need to aim at. And I think there's this two extremes that we need to be very careful of, and somewhere in the middle is the way of Jesus, and that's what we need to aim at and learn and try and discover. So in a way, I suppose some people could say that wokeism is leaning towards the extreme where everything goes, and that can be quite dangerous, because sometimes what I want to go for me might be harmful to you. But then, I don't know if that makes sense. So for me, there's somewhere in between that we have to aim at, and it's the way of love. Not judgment, but the way of love. And love is acceptance, and love is, and I hate that phrase, I hate the phrase where it says, love the sinner and hate the sin. That is not scriptural, it's not in the Bible. We hate the way of evil, but we love unconditionally. And love will transform people if they're in the way of sin. Okay. In terms of, what was the second one? I got stuck on the wokeism.
Post-church,
post-church,
post-Christ.
I think we're in a post-church era because the way we do church is outdated. The way we do church is perhaps, it's become something that people, especially younger people, don't seem to see the benefit of. Never forget a young child, I won't say who, because you will know them, A young child once said to me, I don't like church at all. I said, why don't you like church? And this particular child said to me, because all you do is sing and listen, and I don't like either. So we have to find a different way of doing church. Look at the churches of today. Most of them are rather elderly, no offense. Most of them are rather elderly. Younger people, it's very few younger people that go to church. We have to find a different way of connecting people with Jesus so that we can still be relevant. So we're in a post-church era the way we know church to be. I don't think we could ever be in a post-Christ era because Christ will always be. It'll just be different. So that's what I would say about post-church, post-Christ. I don't think you could ever be post-Christ. I mean, Jesus will find a way to meet people even if the church buildings cease to exist. Just look at COVID. We found different ways of being together and worshiping Christ. Anything else from anybody? Okay. We are going to take a break. This was our last one of part 2. I need a few days or weeks, perhaps, to prepare the next lot. What I did say to some people is that I was looking at doing a different, deeper learning in between this revelation and the next revelation, but because of me wanting to continue my studies, I've been given no pressure from certain people. I'm not going to look at them. to try and do Revelation sooner, so that we can finish Revelation before I embark on my studies. So please watch this space. We'll do Revelation part 3 and possibly part 4 straight after each other within the next couple of weeks. I'll start advertising it, and then we'll do it together so that hopefully we can finish it in time. Okay, anything else from anyone before we close? Great. Charlie, will you close in prayer for us, please?
Gracious Lord, we thank you for this evening and for our interaction and discussion, and once again, the gift of interpretation. And so, Lord God, as we continue on this journey, we thank you for Louise and the work that she does and all the research that she embarks upon to bring that information and that knowledge to us. We pray particularly over the next couple of days, weeks, as she put it, that as she looks at the next part of Revelation, you would inspire her and help her to work through and prepare something once again for us. We thank you for each person here, and for those online, we thank you for them. And we thank you for their continued attendance and dedication to learning more of you, Lord Jesus. So bless us, protect us, keep us safe. We ask and pray this in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.